Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm discussing the adult animated Netflix series BoJack Horseman, created by Raphael Bob-Waksberg. I first heard of this show back in 2015. I was taking a TV writing workshop, and one of the guys in the course, he told us about this show, and he showed us the theme song. And so when I watched it for that first time, my first impression of the character BoJack Horseman was that this is someone who's just unfazed by everything. He's drifting through life, going through the motions, and he's just so stoic and so unhappy. And so I found that intriguing, as well as the actual aesthetic of the show, that it's a horse who's a person, like an anthropomorphic horse. And so based on all that, I was like, I have to watch this show. So I put it on my long list of shows I wanted to watch. And then I finally ended up watching it that following year. So then by then, 3 seasons were available. And just from watching the pilot alone, I was taken by the universe of animals and humans coexisting, because usually with shows with anthropomorphic animals, it's just the animals. But there are a few exceptions here and there, but usually it's just about animals. But this show, it's got the animals and the humans living together. And just from watching that pilot, I found the show so interesting and clever and witty, and I could tell like it had a lot to say, and I was just ready to dive in, and I just ended up binging those 3 seasons within like less than a week. And it has since become truly one of my all-time favorite series, animated or otherwise. And the reason for that is because no other show has affected me as deeply and profoundly as this show has. It's just so absolutely brilliantly written. The characters are so nuanced. There's so many truly innovative ways that they tell stories within the show. I just love it so much. And so even from that pilot, which arguably, I guess you could say, the pilot is perhaps the weakest episode of the series, but that's only because it's establishing the world and it's setting up the characters, and so it's a little exposition-y. That kind of happens in a lot of shows, so I didn't really mind it so much. I still found it funny and everything, and I still found it interesting. But what struck me the most about the pilot is the whole build-up that leads up to the conversation between BoJack and Diane Nguyen, one of the other main characters of the show, and their whole discussion about happiness. And Diane says that we're in charge of our own happiness. And so what I found interesting about that whole conversation is that it establishes a central theme of the show, this idea of finding your own happiness, your own destiny, your own meaning in life. And so that is going to be an important theme throughout the show. And what also struck me about that conversation is that this is going to be an important relationship to follow, the relationship between Diane and BoJack. So before I get into all that, let me just briefly break down the main characters for you. We have BoJack Horseman, the titular character, and he is a washed-up sitcom actor from the popular 90s sitcom Horsin' Around. And that show is just like a parody of saccharine family shows like Full House. And it was a successful show, but he has since not done anything substantial with his life. And then we have Todd Chavez, who's his roommate, who's just like a drifter and a really happy-go-lucky guy, but he just doesn't have any direction in life. And then there's Mr. Peanut Butter, who was in a show that was very similar to Horsin' Around, but it was called Mr. Peanut Butter's House. And he is this yellow lab who is the epitome of a dog, loyal, happy, friendly. Everything comes easy to him. He's the absolute polar opposite of BoJack. And then there is BoJack's ex-girlfriend, really on-again, off-again girlfriend, also his agent, a pink cat named Princess Carolyn. And she's this go-getter. She's this hardworking woman who just wants success and is always there to put out fires for people. And then we have Diane Nguyen, an Asian American human. Humans, animals. She's a human. And she is trying to find a purpose in life. She loves to write, but she feels very isolated from people, that people don't understand her. But then the friendship begins to blossom between her and BoJack. But BoJack is a really flawed character, to say the least. He's depressed, he struggles with addiction, he struggles with the fact that he desperately wants to be liked, and he wants people to know him for who he really is, even though he sees that he's a shitty person in a lot of ways. And he just really struggles with wanting to be happy, and even though he had all this success, he just can't be happy. He wants to feel good about himself. And so one of the biggest questions that the show asks is if people are able to change, the capacity for change, like have the capacity for change. And it asks that by drawing attention to what it means to be a quote-unquote good person or a quote-unquote bad person. And in this latest season, they especially hit home with the theme that there aren't necessarily all good or all bad people, that doesn't exist. That someone who's good still does bad things, and vice versa. Someone who's bad can still do good things. And so having those labels is actually detrimental to yourself in terms of wanting to grow or change, because you shouldn't look at yourself as, oh, I'm a shitty person, so that's it, I'm a lost cause. Or, oh, I'm great, so I don't have to feel bad about someone else's misery or whatever, someone else's shitty life, say. And so in that sense, BoJack, while he isn't necessarily meant to be seen as someone who should be okay with who he is relatable in a lot of ways. And when I say that he shouldn't be okay with who he is, it's because he's kind of portrayed as the anti-hero, and we see that more and more as the show progresses. But even in this latest season especially, they have the parallel of BoJack and starring in this new show that he's on called Filbert. And since I'm talking about season 5, fair warning, there's going to be spoilers in this podcast. So if you haven't seen the latest season especially, definitely watch the entire series before listening. So anyway, each season has its own arc. In the first season, it's all about BoJack writing his memoir, and so that's why Diane is hired to ghostwrite his memoir. In the second season, it's about BoJack acting in his dream movie, Secretariat. The third season is about the Oscar circuit. He's trying to win an Oscar. The fourth season is about him getting to know who he thinks is his biological daughter. And we learn more about his mother. There's more layers to that. And then season 5 is about him on a show called Filbert, this drama series, kind of like a True Detective-esque show. And this is one of the rare shows where I absolutely love every single episode. Even the early ones, which there seems to be a consensus that the early episodes of the series are the weakest, that like you gotta push through them, or whatever the heck that means. You gotta push through them to really enjoy the show. But for me, I loved every single episode thus far. There's 61 episodes to date, 12 per season, and then the one extra is a Christmas special that came out after the first season, back in 2014. That one's called Sabrina's Christmas Wish. And anyway, so the first season, though, it establishes the characters, and we learn that BoJack has a lot of darkness in his past because his hard upbringing, his parents that didn't really love him, that he was neglected, and he just he feels very empty. He wants to have a real connection with people, wants to have healthy relationships, but he's broken. And so through that, though, unfortunately, he hurts people who care about him, and we see these relationships crumble as the show progresses, and we see the kind of really truly heinous things that he's done. And yet, despite all that, the whole idea is that can he change? And we want to believe that he can. So besides that, the whole thing about change, one of the other things about this show is the idea of pushing the boundaries in terms of television, that there aren't necessarily happy endings or sad endings. There's really just no sense of closure, because that's how life isn't like that. So it challenges certain TV norms. Well, everything needs to be wrapped up in a nice bow and that's it. It's not like that at all, this show. There's really no sense of closure, and there's a sense of life keeps going. So that's why I'm really interested to see eventually, when this show comes to an end, how they're going to end the series, because this show is constantly pushing against traditional endings. And so to start getting into specifics a little bit, in season 1, there's an episode called Our A Story is a D Story. And first of all, I just love that title. But that is a crucial episode, because in that episode, BoJack is trying to impress Diane, because he develops feelings for her, but she at the time is dating Mr. Peanut Butter. And so he, in this jealous rage, jealous fit, he takes the D off of the Hollywood sign, and so it becomes Hollywood. And so from that point on in the show, they address it's Hollywood, not Hollywood. And that's just awesome, because it's a parody of Hollywood. It's not necessarily the real Hollywood. So it just frees them to do even more, even though this show has a lot of commentary on society today in terms of Hollywood, but also just things going on in the world. For example, the season 2 episode, Hank After Dark. That reminds me, that was one of the first few episodes that I had seen an article about before I actually ended up watching the show. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But that episode is about a certain beloved TV star being accused of sexual allegations. Actually, they have another episode this past season too. This past season as well. The Stopped Show, where the head of the TV network where they're working on the new show called What Time Is It Right Now, the name of the TV network, the president is a sex robot that Todd built, and he gets accused of sexual harassment, which is more pertinent than ever in life, really, but it's more pertinent than ever in Hollywood specifically in terms of the show. But another episode, with this social commentary on today's society, is from season 4, called Thoughts and Prayers, and the whole dismissive nature of, with all these mass shootings, and people just thoughts and prayers with the victims, and then they just kind of move on from it all. That's a great episode as well. Anyway, for me, what makes this show stand out, besides the whole world with animals and humans coexisting, is the many different ways that they tell stories. For instance, one that comes to mind is Fish Out of Water. That was a really critically acclaimed episode. That's an episode that's told almost exclusively with no dialogue. There's less than 3 minutes of dialogue. Only in the cold open there's some dialogue. And then actually the tail end. And this isn't the first show to do that, dialogue-free episode. It won't be the last. But what I loved about that episode is it was a really compelling story. BoJack was trying to promote his new movie, Secretariat, and he runs into an old director that he accidentally had gotten fired. Her name is Kelsey Jennings. And anyway, the whole premise of that episode is he realizes by the end that it's about, he had to swallow his pride, and he talks about all we have in this world are connections in life, and I'm sorry. But what was intriguing about that episode was that he finds this little baby seahorse. It's so cute. The male seahorse gives birth, and he has to bring this little baby seahorse back home. And so it's just with stunning visuals, and there's some sound effects here and there, but was an excellent episode the way they told that plot. Another great episode with unique storytelling devices is The Old Sugarman Place. That is from season 4. And in that one, BoJack had run away from LA, and he's in his mother's old summer home. And through that episode, it weaves in the present with BoJack trying to rebuild the house and flashbacks of BoJack's mother and what she was like as a child and why she turned out to be this kind of cold, impossible to please woman that BoJack now sees her as, and he has a lot of resentment towards her. He really has resentment towards both his parents, but at the start of the series, the father had already passed. In season 1, the parents are kind of definitely more one-dimensional, and they are more unsympathetic. We just see that they were really shitty to BoJack, and it's kind of more of a sign of how he turned out the way he is, so broken. But by season 4, after all the backstory with Beatrice, BoJack's mom, it's like through the unfortunate circumstances, it's why she turned out the way she is. So this is what I'm trying to say with all that, is that this show makes you really feel for the characters, especially with Princess Carolyn, because she's one of those characters who just is so genuine, and she has some of the most hard-hitting moments. Really, they all do, to be fair. Probably also Diane and BoJack, really all of them. But with Princess Carolyn specifically, it's like one of her goals is that she wants to have a child. And all in season 4, we see her suffering through miscarriages, unfortunately. And then this past season especially, it's like a really big arc. And again, spoilers, but by the end of season 5, the season 5 finale, she finally ends up getting to adopt a baby. And it's like such a huge relief. Like finally, after all this time, she's finally going to have a little baby. And she's so deserving of it because she's so kind and she just wants to be a mother. And so it's finally one of these characters really getting what they want. But speaking of Princess Carolyn, one of the most hard-hitting episodes to me was also season 4, the episode called Ruthie. And that episode, that's another unique one because there's a framing device of Princess Carolyn's great-great-great-granddaughter giving a presentation about her ancestry, about Princess Carolyn. But then by the end of the episode, we find out that Princess Carolyn's talking to BoJack, and we find out that that's just a scenario that Princess Carolyn likes to tell herself to make herself feel better, so that it was never real in the first place, the whole little great-granddaughter thing. And that was one of the most gut-punching moments to me. I had to, when I was binging that season last year, I was like, oh my goodness, I gotta pause for a second, because that was brutal. Oh. And speaking of brutal moments, one of the unique things about this show that's kind of like an understanding among diehard fans is that the 11th episode of each season is arguably like the most brutal one. It's kind of like what each season is building towards, the climax of each story arc and the really hard-hitting, intense moments of the series. In season 1, it is the episode Downer Ending. And in that episode, BoJack goes on a bender with his former co-star, Sarah Lynn. By the end of it, BoJack he goes up to Diane, he asks her to tell him that he's a good person, and she just can't tell him that. And then it just was so eerie and so heart-wrenching. In season 2, the 11th episode is called Escape from LA. And that episode ends up being really a turning point in terms of BoJack's, not even if you could say character growth, maybe character deterioration, maybe that's a better word. But anyway, in that episode, he decides to go to visit his old friend Charlotte, who he could have basically had a whole different life with, and he thinks about that a lot, that instead of becoming a sitcom star. He could have moved away and just had a happy life with the family and everything, but he chose the Hollywood life. Sorry, the Hollywood life. And anyway, in that episode, he ends up taking Charlotte's teenage daughter to her prom, and she decides that she wants to sleep with BoJack, and she says, I'm 17, so it's the legal age of consent in New Mexico, and I didn't drink, and I want this. And he tells her no, but then he leaves his door open to this boat that he bought. And then the mom, Charlotte, ends up walking in and seeing them, and it's just an absolutely kind of terrifying moment, because he would have slept with this young girl, and it just shows the kind of person he is, someone who's 3 times her age, and it's just really sad. In season 3, the episode 11 is called That's Too Much Man, and that's when he goes on another bender with Sarah Lynn, and then she tragically ends up passing away. And then in season 4, episode 11 is Time's Arrow. That one also has unique storytelling, because it's through Beatrice's shaky memories, because she has dementia, and so that episode is told through a series of flashbacks, and there's like faces, like there's characters that don't have faces because she can't recall them, like backgrounds keep changing, certain details keep popping up or melting away because she can't remember them properly. And then by the end, I was in tears, because that episode is just so gripping and so well done, and truly shows the strengths of the medium in which this show is told with animation, because no other live action show could tell stories like that with like the constantly changing backgrounds and stuff. It just wouldn't have been as effective. And so they really played to their strengths with using with animation. Anyway, with that episode, that one was one of the episodes where I ended up crying. I've cried every single time I've watched that episode, and mostly because of the ending with BoJack. Instead of telling off his mom that he wanted to do, he instead, in her moment of lucidity at the end, when she recognizes him, he sits down, he just kind of talks to her gently and like brings her back to a moment where she was happy. Like, we're here with your family, Mom, and we're eating ice cream, like giving her this indulgence that she never had, like just a happy memory that she can go back to. Because even though he has all this resentment and anger towards his mother, that was one of the more selfless things he's done. That, and also in the Fish Out of Water episode, when he just brings that little baby seahorse to his dad and doesn't want anything in return. So that is some of the more selfless acts that we see from BoJack in the show. And then in season 5, the most recent season thus far, this 11th episode is called The Showstopper. And that episode is so chilling, because it's BoJack again, like in this drug-induced state of mind, and he's hopped up on painkillers, and he doesn't know like what's real and what's the show anymore. Like, things are blending between reality and his own mind. And that episode was terrifying, because, okay, I'll get into this now. By the end of that, he ends up strangling his co-star, and that was such a scary moment. Watching that the first time, I like unconsciously had my hand over my neck. I was like, oh my god, is he gonna fucking kill her? Like, that's insane. Which brings me to what I'll call the show's seasonal fuck. And if you already know what I'm talking about, just bear with me for a moment. But if you have no idea what the heck I'm talking about, I'll explain. One of the other unique things about this show is its deliberate use of language, and specifically with the word fuck. And each season, a character utters it in a moment of true anger and hatred, and almost exclusively towards BoJack. It's a sign that BoJack has done so much wrong to this person that they're cutting them out of his life cutting them out of their lives. And there are a couple of other occasions where they do say fuck elsewhere. Actually, the first utterance of the word fuck is in the episode Live Fast, Diane to Win. And like one of Diane's brothers says that we're American as fuck. And then in season 3 also, Diane says it at the end of the episode Love and or Marriage when she finds out she's pregnant, and it's a funny edit. She says like and then it cuts to credits, and then in the following episode brat brat pew pew when she gets an abortion, she says fuck her, like she finishes off the swear. That one's funny, but I'm digressing. Back to the seasonal fuck. So as I was saying, every other time besides this other couple of occasions, every other time the word fuck is used, it's almost always directed at BoJack, and it's a sign that he's done them so wrong that that's it, that relationship is over. In season 1, it's in the episode The Telescope, and BoJack's old best friend Herb Kazaz says it to him. And Herb was the creator of Horsing Around, and basically BoJack kind of abandoned him after Herb was fired from the show. Anyway, BoJack goes to him for forgiveness in all these years later, because now Herb is dying of cancer, and Herb says, well, I'm not going to forgive you. You don't get to have that closure. And then BoJack's just desperate for him to forgive him, but then he just won't, and he just says, now get the fuck out of my house. And then that's it. He unfortunately ends up passing away in season 2, but it's from an unrelated thing, which that's a whole funny thing too. But anyway, in season 2, the fuck is uttered by Charlotte in the Escape from LA episode, after the whole thing with Charlotte's daughter Penny, that BoJack almost slept with her. She's just so enraged, and she says, if you ever try to contact me or my family again, I will fucking kill you. And it's so, like, you feel it in that moment. You feel how absolutely pissed off she is, how absolutely she means it. She really does. In season 3, to me that's like the most heartbreaking one, because it's from Todd. And Todd's like such a sweetheart, and he's such a, I know, whatever, saying good person, that's negating the show, but he's a good guy. He's such a sweetheart, Todd. And anyway, he gets upset with BoJack because BoJack ends up sleeping with Todd's girlfriends, the only woman that Todd has ever been in love with, or so BoJack says, the only woman he's ever seen Todd be in love with. And anyway, Todd says, he gets angry and he goes on this rant, and he says, the episode is called It's You, and he says to BoJack, you are all the things that are wrong with you. It's not the alcohol or the drugs or any of the shitty things that happened to you in your career or when you were a kid. It's you, alright? It's you. Fuck, man. What else is there to say? And so that's kind of like when their friendship deteriorates, Todd and BoJack. Because up until that point, Todd was just living on BoJack's couch, and BoJack kind of just let him stay there because he's very lonely and he just wants a companion, even though it's for his own selfish reasons, allowing him to stay there. But anyway, since then, let's see, in season 4, they don't interact that much. They interact a little bit, but Todd kind of says, BoJack, we haven't been talking, that's kind of been working for me. And then even in season 5 now, they aren't really friends either. In season 5, it's more, when they talk, it's just about business type stuff, really. So anyway, I'm sure there's more room for that relationship. We'll see whatever happens there. But in season 4, there's a bit of a shift, because instead of someone saying fuck you to BoJack, it's BoJack talking about his mother. And he's talking about his mother to Hollyhock, because Hollyhock wants to visit her, so they visit her at the home. And then he learns that his mother has dementia and that she's deteriorating, she's not in good health. And so she doesn't even recognize him. But then there is a brief instance where she recognizes him from watching his show Horsing Around, his old show Horsing Around. And anyway, so then he comes up with an idea. He says, we'll do a horsing around here at the home. She'll love it because it's her son, BoJack. Then after the show, I'll come out and say hello. And she'll say, BoJack, is that you? And when her eyes spark with recognition, I'm going to sit down next to her. I'm going to squeeze her hand and get real close and say, fuck you, Mom. And so that's why in the episode Time's Arrow, it's all the more powerful when, by the end, when Beatrice recognizes BoJack, instead of telling her off, he doesn't do that. He decides to give her a moment of peace and happiness and calmness, and that's why it just was so touching, and I loved that moment. It's actually the last moment we see of Beatrice on screen because she ends up passing away in season 5. Anyway, speaking of season 5, the seasonal fuck is in the episode The Showstopper, and it's after BoJack is on drugs, and then he's doing a scene with Gina, his co-star, and he's strangling her. And as I mentioned, it's such a scary moment. I thought at one point he was going to kill her. I was like, oh my God, is he actually going to kill this person? It was that terrifying. And at the end, they pry him off of her, and she says, what the fuck is wrong with you? It's filled with such fear. And so I just find that really interesting, that concept of using language to really pack a punch. It's just another one of these unique things about this show. And now to deviate from that again, speaking more about season 5, and again about the show's clever ways that they tell stories, another great episode is from this past season. It's called Interior Sub. And in that episode, there is a framing device with a therapist named Dr. Indira and her wife, Mary Beth. And they're having a conversation about their patients and everything. And then Dr. Indira was like, well, I'll just change all the names. So this is about Bobo the angsty zebra. And then with the theme song, it's BoJack as a zebra. So already I was like, oh man, this is awesome. And so then she calls Diane Princess Diana of Wales. And then Mr. Peanut Butter is Mr. Chocolate Hazelnut Spread. And so they just look like that for the majority of the episode. And then Princess Carolyn, she calls Priscilla Crustacean. And then in the B story of that episode, it's with Princess Carolyn and Todd and arguing about whether Princess Carolyn stole Todd's string cheese. And Mary Beth calls Princess Carolyn a tangled fog of pulsating yearning in the shape of a woman. It's just so funny, like so strange. I just loved it. And Todd was Emperor Fingerface. And anyway, to get into some of the humor of this show now, because I've been talking about really a lot of the really heavy moments. But in that episode, a funny line, like talking about TV and everything, kind of meta commentary on TV, she says, there's definitely more to your story than mine. Mine's more like a secondary story, a B story, if you will. And then her wife says, I have a feeling it will continue to offer a light alternative as my story gets increasingly serious. And then she replies, let's continue to switch back and forth between our stories, pausing at their most interesting moments. That feels like the most natural way to have a conversation. I just love that. It's so silly. And speaking of making fun of television, another funny thing about this show is when they're purposely expositional and they just call attention to it, and it's just so funny. In season 5, what I'm thinking of is the episode Mr. Peanut Butter's Booze. And in that episode, which is another excellent episode, the way they tell the story, it's different Halloween parties held at BoJack's house. And Mr. Peanut Butter each time has a different significant other. First, he's with his first wife, Katrina. That was in 1993. And then in 2004, he's with his second wife, Jessica Biel. Then in 2009, he's with his then girlfriend turned wife, now ex-wife in season 5, Diane. And then in the present, 2018, he is with his current girlfriend, Pickles, who's named Pickles Aplenty, by the way. Awesome name. Anyway, so in that one, Diane says You're the guy from The Hangover, the first one, which just came out this year. Why did I say first one? There's only one Hangover movie, and it's 2009. Like, they're just pointing out, like, the year it is, like, just calling attention to it just makes it funny to me. Later in that episode, there's a part where Todd's trying to get candy, and then he doesn't get candy because he's too old to get candy, apparently, while trick-or-treating. And then they're going to TP the house, and then his friend says, "Are you sure this is a good idea, 13-year-old Todd?" Like, it's just so, like, just really hit the nail on the head with, so you know exactly what year it is, you know exactly what's going on, and it's just so clunky and purposely expositional that it makes it hilarious to me. I don't know, I just find that really funny, that kind of silly humor. And speaking of silly humor, I think some of the funniest lines really are from Todd, but also from Mr. Peanut Butter. Like, in season 2, the episode Chickens, one of my favorite quotes, it's just so freaking random and hilarious and dumb, but here it is from the episode season 2, Chickens, from Mr. Peanut Butter. "I believe it was Benjamin Franklin who said, 'You have reached the end of your free trial membership at BenjaminFranklinQuotes.com.' Like, what? It's just so ridiculous, but I love it. It's just so funny. A lot of his humor, though, is like him using these ridiculous pop culture references to say a simple line. For example, in the episode Planned Obsolescence from this past season, season 5, he says, "Am I Steve Carell taking a dramatic role in Little Miss Sunshine? And are you the American public that only knows him for his comedic work? Because surprise!" Or again in the episode Mr. Peanut Butter's Booze, "Am I written by Albert Hammond and Diane Warren, originally recorded by Tina Turner, but popularized by Ace of Base? Because don't turn around." So silly, oh my goodness. And then, of course, there's Todd with his just amazing lines. In the episode Chickens, again from season 2, one of my favorite random lines. "Why was he wearing sunglasses at night?" Referring to Officer Meow Meow Fuzzy Face, I believe. And speaking of him, in that same episode, that episode's just so funny. I guess it's one of the funniest episodes in my opinion. But in that episode, there's like a chicken who just like clucks. She doesn't speak English, and so she just keeps saying "bok, bok, bok, bok," and so they just keep using silly puns with that word. And then he says, "Who's your favorite Baroque composer?" So she says Bach, and he's like, "Bach? Not Vivaldi? You're insane." And she's like, "Bic, bic, bic." And then he's like, "Yes, I'm holding a Bic pen, but I don't see how that's relevant, Mrs. Chavez." Just so dumb. I just love it. Oh my gosh, I'm thinking now. Okay, one of my biggest laughs from this show, this is so random, but I don't know, it just made me absolutely laugh hysterically when I first saw it. From the episode The BoJack Horseman Show. That episode's so funny because it's just a bunch of any obscure reference you could think of from 2007, since it's set in 2007, that episode. So it's just, all the sight gags are amazing. But in that episode, Todd is with his girlfriend's Emily, and then he has to run away because the dad comes home. So she's like, "Here, take this." And so he's like the editor of The Sopranos. So he takes like the tape reel and like he jumps out the window, but then like it snaps off. And if you know the ending to The Sopranos, spoiler alert, the series finale, it just cuts mid-sentence. And so when I first saw that, I just died laughing. I don't know, it was just so hilarious to me. I was like, oh my god, so it's Todd's fault that The Sopranos ended the way it did, just cutting to black mid-sentence? I don't know, I just found that so funny. But another hilarious random Todd quote from the episode Yesterdayland, when they're talking about, he's like being sued by Disneyland, but he's like, well, maybe they've trademarked the wrong name, and somehow it had 2 I's, Disney, like Diisney. Anyway, in that episode, they're like, this was a gross miscarriage of justice or something along those lines, and he just says, "Hooray, gross miscarriage." Oh my goodness. And then, let's see, there's another great line. There's a couple of other great lines in the season 4 finale, What Time Is It Right Now? Just some silly lines like, "Call me 4 out of 5 dentists because I agree." And another one of Todd's lines, "As my blood type always says, be positive." And speaking of hilarious Todd moments, I think this past season 5 episode, Planned Obsolescence, has one of the most absolutely hilarious subplots with Todd and his girlfriend Yolanda. She's I'm going to butcher this, an asexual ashetol. And since I'm getting into that briefly, let me pause for a second. The fact that Todd is asexual, that's something that's really, I haven't seen that in any other show personally. I don't know if any other show has done that with the main character being asexual. So that's just cool to see different sexual orientations within this show. That just makes it all the more unique. But anyway, in that episode, Todd and his girlfriend Yolanda have to hide the fact that they are asexual because Yolanda's mom is a porn star, her dad is like a erotic novelist, her twin sister is a sex columnist. It's just so ridiculous, so much like weird humor where he's like, I'm gonna give you the family lube, and then, oh Todd, surely you were just having sex with my daughter, so you can insert your erect penis into that hole to plug up the barrel to stop the lube from pouring everywhere. Just so ridiculous. So funny. Oh my goodness. Other great lines in this show are, there's so many tongue twisters, and I think Princess Carolyn has some of the best tongue twisters. Let's see, I'm going to try to read a couple of them. In the episode See Mr. Peanut Butter Run, the season 4 opener, which, by the way, is another cool episode. That one, BoJack isn't in that one at all, so everyone else is in it, but he's not. Anyway, in that episode, let's see, one of the lines she says is, are you still looking for a star for your transgender Teddy Roosevelt Planes, Trains, and Automobiles reboot? Plans, Trans, a Man, a Canal, Panama? And then there's one in Hooray, Todd episode. That one goes like this. This was supposed to be Courtney's crossover coronation, but that's sort of been thwarted, unfortunately, because Courtney's purportedly falling short of shoring up 4-quadrant support. I barely got through that. Okay, let me try another one. From the season 4 episode, Thoughts and Prayers. You know Courtney Portnoy. You probably recall when she soared as the thorny horticulturist in One Sworded Fortnight with the short-skirted sorceress. How would you enjoy journeying? I can't. Oh my goodness. Let's see. How would you enjoy joining Portnoy for a scorched soy, porch house, pork, 4-course, or a koi? Glorify your source, but don't make it feel forced, of course, and try the borscht. Wow, that's a mouthful. All right, one more. From season 5, Mr. Peanut Butter's Booze. Here's one. I deserve to be adored by a man, yet here my dreams lie dormant. I don't mean to get morbidly morbid, but did I get all adorably adorned to get bored manning doors? No more. Oh my goodness. I could barely get through those. Those are fun. And then another great running gag from this show is Mr. Peanut Butter's off-screen friend, Erica. We still haven't seen her to this day. I don't know if we ever will see her on the show. I'm kind of fine not ever seeing her because I just like the random clues they give you each time about what she looks like maybe. But anyway, let me just read out a few of the non-sequitur lines from Mr. Peanut Butter. Erica, get out of here with that face. That's from the first episode of the series. Let's see, here's another one. Erica, you know you're not allowed to vote in national elections. Here's another great one. Erica, look at you with the right number of ears. And then another one from Mr. Peanut Butter's Booze. Erica, love the costume. Where'd you find such a hideous... Oh, my mistake. I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh, that's crazy. And then another funny running gag is the news report, the news anchor Tom Mumbo Jumbo, who's a whale, and his just random disdain for Randy, another off-screen character. But what's funny, though, is that in season 4, the episode the Hooray Todd episode, this is a great line from him. The gubernatorial hopeful has until now played coy on the controversial issue of what happened? Randy pass out on his keyboard? Oh, he did? Oh my god, is he okay? Well, did someone call Cynthia? No one called Cynthia? For Christ's sake, this isn't just a newsroom, this is a family. So he does care about Randy, so that was nice. And then what's also absolutely brilliant about this show is there are hundreds and hundreds of sight gags. This is one of those shows you can watch over and over and truly notice something different every single time. So they have a lot of the animal gags, of course. Let's see, some I could think of are frog like running across the street a la Frogger. Or in this past season, there's like a chameleon blending against the building, it's like trying to stand up her date, and then like once the date walks away, she like you see her appear and she runs away. Or a giraffe with multiple neck pillows. Or in the season 5 finale, there's a hare sitting all sad by himself drinking, and then there's a tortoise with his friends celebrating after a race, like Tortoise and the Hare. Or in the episode Head in the Clouds from this past season as well, a moth flies up to the light and then he gets electrocuted off screen. And then there's also a lot of banner gags. For example, there's a lot in season 1, but let's see. For example, in season 1, congrats Diane and Mr. Peanut Butter. Mr. Peanut Butter is one word. Don't write one word. In season 2, happy birthday Diane and use a pretty font. In season 3, welcome home little bro. Oh, also I have a Groupon. That's just a few. There's plenty more. Also, there's a lot of t-shirt gags, like also in season 2. I had a ball at Diane's 35th birthday, an underlined ball. I don't know why this is so hard. In season 5, there's a great one in the episode The Amelia Earhart Story, when just a random character is like sifting through t-shirts and he holds one up and it says, stop pausing and just watch the show. Like, okay, duly noted. And then I just have to point this out, another hilarious moment that made me laugh this past season in the episode Planned Obsolescence, when BoJack is talking to Gina and he's like teasing her for liking musicals, and it's a musical about corn. He's like, this is so corny. And she's like, well, it is technically about corn, but the kernel of truth, whatever. And so she goes like, okay. And then he says, when you say okay, do you mean okay like correct, or okay like Oklahoma? Step ball change, shuffle off to Buffalo, and big finish. And then like he crashes into the lights, and he's just like, ouch, god damn it. Once again, my life has been worsened by a brush with musical theater. I don't know, I went back and watched that a couple of times. It just makes me laugh every single time. It's just so stupid, but so funny. And speaking more about season 5, since it's just fresh in my memory, since I just watched it, I've watched it twice now, actually. But anyway, I noticed in that season that there were way more callbacks to season 1, which I found interesting. Like, even in the opener this season, they were like, this kind of looks like David Boreanaz's house. And then the show creator, Flip McVicker, says, our set designer actually took a tour there. And that's a callback, the David Boreanaz thing, that's a callback to the season 1 episode, Live Fast, Diane to Win, with Todd just giving a tour of BoJack's house, them thinking it's David Boreanaz's house, just so random. Another thing that was kind of like a reach that took me a second to remember was the character Doctor Who. You remember him? He was from season 1. There were like all these jokes like Doctor Who, WHO, but he's actually Doctor Who, HU, and he's the one giving BoJack painkillers. But anyway, that was funny to me. Another funny thing was, you remember the Celebrity Stealing Club? Those girls that just like go and steal from celebrities? Because I saw them in the background stealing a painting from BoJack's house in Mr. Peanut Butter's booze. That was funny. Those girls still, doing their thing. Anyway, so the combination of all this just really silly, laugh-out-loud humor and these truly compelling ways they tell stories and these really dark moments in the show, this relatable stuff like characters with neuroses and anxieties and depression and what it means to be good or be bad or wanting to change. It's just all so brilliant to me. And I have to mention the episode, I'm rambling so much in this, I apologize, but I could just go on and on about this show. I'm kind of all over the place, but I could really devote an entire podcast to just this show and talking about each episode individually, and maybe I will do that someday after the show ends, of course, and we'll see. But until then, I want to talk about the episode Free Churro, which I think is one of the standout episodes this season, because in that episode, another brilliant storytelling device, that episode is told almost entirely in a monologue. The cold open is BoJack is a flashback of BoJack's father picking BoJack up and him rambling on and saying, "You can't depend on anybody, BoJack. You better remember that." And then after that, the remainder of the episode is BoJack giving the eulogy for his mom who passed away. And I think it was maybe about 2 minutes into the eulogy that I caught on, that this is just going to be a eulogy. That's all they're going to do. Okay, I'm ready. If anyone can do this, it's this show, to make it interesting and engaging and just an excellent episode. And truth be told, it is an amazing episode. I was just enthralled the entire time, like listening to BoJack's kind of stream of consciousness talking about his mom and him talking about her last words, "I see you." And he's trying to make sense of what she meant by that. Like, did she mean that she saw him? Like, I see you sitting there. Or did she mean, "I see you. Like, I finally see you, BoJack. I'm here for you." But then as it progresses, we find out that she was talking about ICU, that they were in the ICU. But what's great about that episode is he talks a lot about his mom and what she meant to him. He talks a lot about his dad. He talks a lot about his show, Horsing Around, and I'm going to share a few excerpts from that monologue, but it's so brilliant, that episode. Oh my goodness. Anyway, here's one. "You can't have happy endings in sitcoms. Not really, because if everyone's happy, the show would be over. And above all else, the show has to keep going. There's always more show. And you can call Horsing Around dumb or bad or unrealistic, but there is nothing more realistic than that. You never get a happy ending, because there's always more show. I guess until there isn't." Here's another one. "And as a child who was completely terrified of both my parents, I was always aware that this moment of grace, it meant something. We understood each other in a way. Me and my mom and my dad, as screwed up as we all were, we did understand each other. My mother, she knew what it's like to feel your entire life like you're drowning, with the exception of these moments, these very rare, brief instances in which you suddenly remember you can swim." And that moment is special because it's when BoJack pauses and he just kind of recalls his mom dancing, and like an actual moment of when maybe his parents really loved each other, because he mentions that that's when his dad would actually come out from his office or whatever, from his writing, and he would just stand there and watch his mom dance around and everything, which is really touching. And this episode just works so well, even though, because with animation, usually, like, that's one of the things you're not supposed to do, like, just have quote-unquote talking heads, meaning, like, the character is just talking and there's little action, but there's so much going on, like, within this eulogy, and then, like, he doesn't just stand stationary either, he does, like, kind of walk around a bit. What I'm getting at is that episode is really so brilliantly written, as is every episode of this show. I truly feel that way. But anyway, another great quote from that episode. "All three of us were drowning, and we didn't know how to save each other, but there was an understanding that we were all drowning together. I would like to think that that's what she meant when we were in the hospital and she said, 'I see you.'" And unfortunately, it's not what she meant. But this is the conclusion of his monologue. He says, "My mother is dead and everything is worse now, because now I know I will never have a mother who looks at me from across the room and says, 'BoJack Horseman, I see you.' But I guess it's good to know. It's good to know that there is nobody looking out for me, that there never was and there never will be. No, it's good to know that I am the only one that I can depend on. And I know that now, and it's good. It's good that I know that. So it's good my mother is dead." Well, no point beating a dead horse. Beatrice Horseman was born in 1938 and she died in 2018. And I have no idea what she wanted. Unless she just wanted what we all want, to be seen. And then this episode ends so amazingly because, so he opens the casket and he just kind of stares for a second, and then he takes out a piece of paper and he looks up and he just sees a bunch of geckos, I believe, if I'm recalling correctly. And then he just says, "This funeral parlor B," and it's just like kind of like oh, of course he's in the wrong funeral home, because again, this show pushes against the idea of actual catharsis, of actual closure, because that makes it all the more realistic. But like, what a great button to end that episode. And it's just so funny. Like, tragic yet funny. Like, I teared up a lot through that episode too. And then another interesting thing about BoJack's character is him trying to understand what it really means to love someone. In the season 3 episode, Best Thing That Ever Happened, that episode is great too, because there's only an A story in that one, and it's BoJack deciding to fire Princess Carolyn as his agent, and then he's in his restaurant and he's like, do all these things, and she just keeps helping him because that's what she does. She puts out fires for people, and she wants to know if he ever really loved her. He says, "I do love you, by the way. I mean, as much as I'm capable of loving anyone, which is never enough. I'm sorry." And it draws back to the fact that BoJack doesn't feel he's deserving of love, but then there's a great, nice quote from Mr. Peanut Butter when he says, "BoJack, there's one thing I know, it's that everyone deserves love." And then in season 5, there's the episode Ancient History, when Hollyhock comes to visit BoJack. And brief tangent about Hollyhock. She's a great character. So we find out that she comes to Hollywoo in season... Hollywoo, I love that. She comes to Hollywoo in season 4 because she wants to find her birth mother. And so, spoiler alert for all that, we find out her birth mother is Henrietta. And in that season, BoJack's mom keeps calling BoJack Henrietta. So we find out she was the maid, and that BoJack's father knocked up the maid, and then she ends up giving Hollyhock up for adoption, and she's adopted by 8 fathers, which that's unique too. 8 fathers. They're in a polyamorous relationship. Let's see, her full name is Hollyhock Mannheim Guerrero Robinson Zilberslag Huang Fonzarelli McQuack. I butchered that a little bit, I apologize. Anyway, she's a great character, and we find out that she wasn't BoJack's biological daughter, but his half-sister. And she wasn't in this season enough. I mean, that's one of my criticisms of this season 5. I was hoping she'd be in it a little more, and specifically because the end of season 4, she went off to see her birth mother. But we haven't seen her yet, though, the birth mother, Henrietta. Like, she's mentioned, BoJack mentions her in season 5, but we don't get to see her at all. We don't get to know what happened with that storyline. But I'm confident that we'll get to see it when the time is right, when it's pertinent to the story. Because even, for example, in season 3, there is a plot point with the character Anna Spanakopita, when BoJack talks about, to a reporter, he talks about what happened in New Mexico with Penny, and so she just says, "I took care of it," and then we never find out what exactly she did, and then it comes back in season 5 that she has the tape, and she plays it for Diane, so Diane gets to hear what BoJack did. But I'm backtracking. Let me backtrack a moment to finish up what I was saying about Hollyhock. Hollyhock, in that episode that she's in, Ancient History, this past episode, season 5, she says, "I love you" to BoJack, and he doesn't say it back to her. I guess he doesn't feel that it means much coming from him. I just find that interesting, that's deliberate as well, the use of "I love yous," because that's not really said much in this show either. So that'll be nice to see when he does say it back to her, because even though he may mean it, he didn't say it, though. And so I'm still looking forward to seeing what happens with their relationship. And anyway, back to Diane, since I mentioned her now. As I mentioned, Diane and BoJack, that's an extremely potent relationship, an extremely important relationship in this show. Because in many ways, I kind of think of them as soulmates, and I don't necessarily mean that in a romantic way. What I mean by that is that they understand each other in a way that nobody else does. Like, Diane knows BoJack and vice versa. And so the whole build-up of this past season is BoJack grappling with his character Filbert and how he doesn't like Filbert because he's a drunk asshole, he's a shitty person, and it reflects on BoJack himself that he is all those things. BoJack says, well, Filbert's bad, but it's okay because we're all bad in a sense. And Diane isn't happy when she hears that because she doesn't want him to think that it's okay that he's rationalizing and justifying his shitty behavior. And it's a meta-commentary on BoJack Horseman, the series. And so they get into like this really big, intense fight, and he ends up telling her about everything that happened in New Mexico, and she just kind of like points fingers at him and talking about that she talks about like all like the terrible things he'd done. For instance, about Sarah Lynn and when Sarah Lynn overdosed. And she wants him to realize that with all these shitty things, like all the shitty things he's done in his life, that he shouldn't see himself as the victim, the one who suffered the most, that it's the people he's hurt who have suffered the most. And she wants him to know that even though he's an asshole at times, a lot of the time, even though he's done so many terrible things, she still believes that he can change and he can be good. And so the true like breaking point this season is when he strangles his co-star, as I mentioned in the episode 11, and he almost could have killed her, and it's so terrifying. And because he was on a drug bender, he was high, but again, he's using that as an excuse. He needs to be better. He needs to realize that he can do better. And so then in season 5, the season 5 finale, he decides to go to rehab. And what's also unique about this season is that it doesn't end with a shot of BoJack. Every season up until that point has ended with a shot of BoJack. In season 1, it ends with him on the Griffith Observatory, which he had planned to do with Herb, even though Herb and him had that falling out and weren't friends anymore. So he just went by himself. In season 2, it's him at the end. He just like collapses in exhaustion because he's running, trying to like be healthier. And then a baboon comes up to him and says, it gets easier. You have to do it every single day, but it gets easier. And he says, BoJack just looking up at the sky saying, okay. In season 3, it ends, he almost commits suicide. But then he like slams on he's like just in his car, like drifting away. And then he slams on the brakes and he just looks out and sees horses running. And he has this look on his face, like a look in awe, and it ends that way. In season 4, the most uplifting ending I felt was when he's talking to Hollyhock, and she says, BoJack, I never needed you as a dad, but I never had a brother before. And it's just such a genuine, pure smile that he has on his face, like an actual moment of happiness, however brief, because this is an important relationship to him. And her saying that is what she's really saying is that I don't need you in my life, but I want you in my life. And it's just so sweet and so heartwarming, truly. And then I found season 5 interesting, the ending, because it doesn't end with a shot of BoJack. It ends with Diane, and she like brings him to rehab, and he asks her, why are you being so nice to me? And she talks about her friend in high school who basically turned her back on her when she was adopted by the popular kids, but then when her friend's mom got sick, she was there for her because even though she hated her, she was her best friend and she loved her. And then she says that to BoJack. She says, even though I hate you, you're my best friend and you need me. But she doesn't say, and I love you, and that's deliberate as well, because I don't know if Diane has romantic feelings for BoJack, and even if she does, this show isn't about that. This isn't about like, oh, are they going to end up together? Because again, this show pushes against those kinds of endings, quote unquote. Like, are they going to end up together? But what I'm getting at is that they have a true friendship, and she wants to see him try, Even though he says, well, what if I do all this, I'm still an asshole, but just more sober. And she thinks, well, that's probably bound to happen. But so he's going to the rehab facility, and we don't see BoJack walking away. It lingers on Diane, and she just kind of waves goodbye, and then she has like this look on her face, like, what's next? Like, is she gonna be independent? What's next for her in her life? And it's just, as she drives away, that's the last shot of the season. And so we're left now at season 5. BoJack's going to be going to rehab. Mr. Peanut Butter isn't necessarily in a good place because he proposes impromptu. He just, like, spur of the moment proposes to his young girlfriend, Pickles. Todd is off on his next adventure. And Princess Carolyn, as I mentioned, she finally got that baby, adopting that baby, which is so sweet. I'm so happy for her. Listen to me talking to her, like, I'm so happy for her. But, these characters do feel real in that way. These writers are so talented. I can't say that enough. And, of course, the artists on this show, like all the storyboard artists and everything, people who direct the show, producers. And another cool thing about this show, this is worth pointing out, this is the very first Netflix series that is going to be on cable. It's going to be airing on Comedy Central, which is really cool. Okay, anyway, I talked ad nauseum about this show. I feel like, though, even with everything I've said, I've only really scratched the surface in terms of how absolutely downright incredible this series is. I can't say that enough. I love this series so, so much. So with all that being said, let's move on now. I do have a short story to share, a BoJack story I wrote. So before I read this, I just want to preface this by saying that I wrote this back in 2017, so it was before season 4 had come out. So I just want to preface it by saying that, and you'll see why as I read it. This is called Temporarily Forget. Without further ado, it's story time. It's a beautiful day, as if something as arbitrary as the weather is even worth pointing out on such a solemn occasion. Yet it's the first thing Diane notices when she steps out of the car that followed the hearse to the cemetery. As she takes in the rows and rows of gray tombstones against lush green grass, she finds herself almost wanting to smile at the morbid irony of growing life surrounding the dead. Fleetingly, she wonders if he, too, would have appreciated the irony, but the passing thought is squashed with the much more painful reminder that it doesn't matter either way. He's dead. He has no more thoughts, no more cares, no more burdens, nothing. There's a big turnout at the funeral, which surprises her, as it never seemed like he had that many friends, or at least, not many who cared enough about him to visit him while he was alive. His former co-stars, the ones who are still around anyway, sit next to one another with stoic looks on their faces. They appear more bored than melancholic, as if they're here only out of obligation rather than actually wanting to be here. Although, to be fair, does anyone ever actually want to be at a funeral? Sure, they're meant to be a celebration of a person's life, a time for reflection and comfort and closure, but when it all comes down to it, funerals are really about one thing: saying goodbye. And Diane is the furthest from ready to say goodbye. She spots Princess Carolyn, whose typically vibrant persona is reduced to nothing more than exchanging polite conversation with fellow mourners. He will be remembered as a beloved talent, she says. The most loyal client she ever had, she adds with a wistful grin. She also spots Todd, though she doesn't recognize him at first, as he's without his hat and his usual cheerful smile. He may as well be a stranger. More and more guests take their seats, awaiting the service to begin. Diane takes a seat as well, in the last row, away from everyone else. She knows she should sit in the front. She knows people are expecting her to sit in the front. In fact, she knows where she really should be is up at the podium, preparing to deliver the eulogy. It's what he would have wanted, they'd said. She knew him so well, they'd said. But did she really know him so well? She thought she did. She wanted to believe she did. Still, there's a part of her that knows it wouldn't have been entirely honest. And she worries that if she would have agreed to write the eulogy, people would have caught on that the connection the two of them shared wasn't nearly as deep as everyone assumed it was. She can still barely wrap her head around the fact that he's gone, and to have to get up in front of everyone and talk about his life, to share intimate recollections detailing the kind of person he was. She just can't bring herself to do it. It would be too difficult, she'd said. He would understand, she'd said. She knows that last one is true, at least. And so, one of his old childhood friends, whom she's personally never met before, agrees to do the eulogy in her place. He walks up to the podium now, staring out at the crowd, the flower-covered casket behind him. As he begins to speak, Diane tries to concentrate on what he's saying. She really does, but everything starts hitting her all at once. She's never going to hear his voice again, never talk to him again, never get to tell him how much he meant to her, how much he still means to her. She feels herself constricting, her breath shortening. People are looking at her in concern, but she ignores them. She can do this, she can do this, she can do this. She can't do this. Not even a minute into the eulogy, she stands, disregarding all the nervous looks being thrown her way. And before she can allow herself to stop and change her mind, she flees. The hours that follow are a blur. She remembers getting back in the car and turning off her phone to avoid anyone who tries to call her and offer more condolences. Or worse, attempts to get her to come back. She remembers going home and collapsing on the couch without even bothering to change out of her black dress. She remembers trying her absolute hardest not to think about him, but of course it's to no avail. She can't escape her thoughts of him whether she's awake or asleep. She can't fight the ache in her chest, the burning lump in her throat, the lifeless feeling in her limbs, the numbness surrounding her heart. She lies there for a long time, staring at nothing, her head swimming in an abyss of memories she wishes she could forget, if only so the pain of losing him will subside, but the memories continue to pour in. Watching him on TV when she was a kid, the first time they met, their many, many conversations. She doesn't register the sound of the front door opening and closing, doesn't pay attention to the approaching footsteps, doesn't bother to acknowledge the person now standing in her doorway, doesn't process that he stands there for half a minute, watching her lie there on the couch, until the sound of his gravelly voice pierces the silence. Hey. A deep breath, a harsh exhale, then, "What do you want, BoJack?" Her tone is sharp with impatience. She doesn't move, but she does will herself to look at him. He too is still in his funeral attire. Yet her attention is immediately drawn to the bags under his eyes. Is he as torn up about this as she is? "You never came back," he says, and it occurs to her that she never actually did see him at the funeral, no doubt thanks to her impromptu exit. People were worried. He pauses, only to add, "including me." "Well, here I am," she says, her tone as scathing as ever. A strained silence takes over. He stands there, uncomfortably hesitant, like he doesn't know what to do or say next, afraid one wrong move will set her off. "Do you want me to leave?" The rational side of her wants to answer, wants desperately to speak her mind and tell him, "No, I don't. Please stay with me. Please help me get through this." And yet, she can't. She's too cowardly, too weak and scared and stubborn, so instead she simply closes her eyes. And now all she wants to do is disappear, to be swallowed up whole and be put out of her misery for good. Anything to make the heartache stop. Perhaps in that moment he takes pity on her. Perhaps her silence is in fact the only response he needs. Perhaps he was never planning on leaving in the first place. Whatever the reason, despite being unable to find the courage to outright tell him to stay, he walks over and joins her on the couch. She feels comfortable enough to sit up, though she finds that lifting her body takes energy out of her she barely possesses. It startles her to realize how lightheaded she feels. When's the last time she ate? She can't remember. She's so hollow. Her eyes drop to her hands, pale, though all she can focus on is her wedding ring, shiny and gold, a callous reminder. Her breath rises and falls in a long, gushing sigh. I was a really shitty wife. BoJack looks at her, though he doesn't say anything. Not right away, at least. He loved me so much, she says, and I guess, deep down, that's why I felt like I didn't need to make much of an effort in my marriage. Because I knew he'd always love me no matter what. So I took him for granted. She tears her gaze away, disgusted. He deserves so much better than me. I'm Horrible. You're not horrible, BoJack says. Yes, I am, Diane says. I am. No, you're not, BoJack says, spiking with exasperation, on the cusp of full-blown anger. I'm not going to sit here and listen to you talk about how much of a shitty person you are when that's not even remotely true. You're intelligent and insightful, and you actually care about things. Nobody cares about anything anymore, except for themselves. But you're not like that. You're extraordinary. Don't ever forget that. Diane's bottom lip trembles as she stares at him with glossy eyes, and he stares back at her with tired ones. He's saying all the right things she needs to hear. He's always been good at that. And for a split second, she forgets all about her overwhelming anguish. She needs this feeling to last a little longer, and the way he's looking at her now, with such genuine warmth, she needs it more than anything, so she kisses him. He tastes like scotch and cigarettes, and while he doesn't reciprocate, he doesn't pull away either. But she wants this, she needs this, and in her rising desperation, she wraps her arms around his neck. He moans, yet still he remains rigid against her. It's like he's at war with himself, straddling the line between his own selfish desires and a rapidly waning conscience. In the end, the latter wins. He breaks away, the sound amplified by the ruthless sting of rejection. She tries to pull him back towards her, but he resists. Diane, no, we can't, she says, ripe with newfound hurt and frustration. What do you mean we can't? Are you saying you don't want this? You had feelings for me once before, didn't you? Yes, but that's not... He stops, takes a breath to collect himself. Gently, he grasps her hands and pries them off. Look, we can't do this. You're emotional. You're not thinking clearly. You just lost your husband. I didn't just lose my husband, she says as she stands, flushed with rage. He died nearly a week ago, okay? It's been almost an entire week. It doesn't matter what we do now. He's dead and he's never coming back, no matter how badly I miss him. Do you not get that? Do you? The words hit her full force. She breaks, covering her face with her hands because she just can't stand it. With nowhere to run away and hide, she drops back down on the couch in a boneless heap. Her breathing is ragged, and her entire body shakes as the grief pours out of her with the depth of a bottomless well. She can't bear this heartache. It's too heavy, dragging her down, and she has no idea how to come back up to the surface, if she even wants to come back up. By the time she's all cried out, all she can do is slump against BoJack's shoulder. This time, he doesn't hesitate as he wraps an arm around her. They sit like that for a while, in a soothing silence. I miss him too, BoJack says out of nowhere. He must read the incredulous look on her face, because now he backtracks and says, I did resent him in a lot of ways, but that was mostly because I hated that I'd never be as upbeat and carefree and as good as he was, no matter what I did. And now, I hate that I never got a chance to tell him how much I admired him, too. In spite of everything, Diane manages a faint smile. That's sweet. He would have loved to hear that. She takes a moment to draw in a leisurely breath, allowing the calmness to wash over her as she exhales. You know, for the first time in my life, I actually wish I believed in an afterlife. It would make me feel better knowing he's up in heaven with big open fields for him to roll around in all day. Yeah, I could see that, BoJack says. Except, wouldn't heaven just consist of, clouds and sunlight and stuff? Maybe, Diane says. She feels lighter now, more relaxed, almost in a daze. Hey, BoJack? He says nothing, and she realizes he's waiting for her to finish her thought. So she lets the words fall easily from her lips. Thank you. She knows him well enough to know that she doesn't need to elaborate any further, knowing he'll be able to fill in the gaps himself of everything she doesn't say out loud. Thank you for coming over to check on me. Thank you for being the level-headed one in the situation and not taking advantage of me in my fragile state of emotion. Thank you for being a good friend. In her haze, she's only partially aware of BoJack helping her to her feet and leading her to her room, before he himself leaves on the promise that he'll call her tomorrow. She murmurs a goodbye, and at long last her exhaustion gives way to sleep. And when she wakes up in the morning, her sadness will undoubtedly return, but she'll be okay with it because, in time, the pain will lessen. Life will go on. She'll go back to building her career and finding new ways to live out her purpose. It'll still hurt, and she'll still miss him, but she'll always carry him in her heart. And that's one thing she'll never let herself forget. Alright, that was Temporarily Forget. I'm curious to know when you picked up on whose funeral it actually was, since I was purposely vague with those details, making it seem like it could have been BoJack's funeral. But with all that being said, that's going to conclude this episode of Storytelling Saga. Be sure to follow the podcast on Facebook and on Instagram at Storytelling Saga, as well as on Twitter at Storytell Saga. You can also send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by leaving a message in the contact section at storytellingsaga.com or by sending me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, I want my pink shirt back because I'll be discussing Mean Girls. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.